Marisa Bellisario, an astrological portrait by Ciro Discepolo. Marisa Bellisario, woman and top manager. How much woman and how much manager? I offer you two versions of the same person for a more complete and detached judgment. I met the woman personally some years ago in the summer. It was June or July, in the most beautiful place in the world. I am referring to Capri, of course. It was early afternoon, and on the sun-drenched terrace of Marina Piccola, amid the sea-green swimming pool, the rocks with the still transparent sea, and the aromas of the adjacent restaurant, our subject, accompanied by a female colleague, white as a bird among people beautifully tanned by the sun, was granting herself half an hour in the sun, having just finished a conference or work meeting. Stretched out on the sunbed and carefully oiled by a friend colleague, we caught her in a moment that is also an essential part of her natal chart. Her eyes closed in a great, intense, and happy breath, wanting to absorb all the beauty that nature, the climate, and the scent of the Faraglioni was spreading through the air at that moment. She was the Cancerian woman, liberating her soul and intensely living a moment of life, pleasure, sun, sea, rocks, and the mysteries of the island so dear to Tiberius. In that moment it was hard to believe that this being, so resembling a canary, so pleasantly smiling and self-indulgent, could be pushing so many important buttons in one of Italy's most important offices in terms of annual turnover and placement within the economy of electronics and telecommunications multinationals. Yes, because for those who do not know, Marisa Bellisario held the top seat at Italtel, the powerful Italian telecommunications multinational. In that deeply inhaled air on the Capri seaside, we grasped Marisa's dominant, the moon conjunct Mars in Libra, a surge, a desire for emotions, an infantile impulse. But there is another Marisa, the Marisa General, that Gianni Brera speaks of in the European magazine on March 18, 1988. She is the top manager who cannot waste time, who answers multiple phones simultaneously, who nervously flips through the newspaper on the jet taking her to Milan, and sends Dario Fagioni to urge the captain to increase speed because I am late. The poor man apologizes, sending word that they have headwinds and simply cannot go any faster. This discussion inevitably leads us to the topic of the compensated Cancer woman, though it also applies to men, a concept we highlighted importantly for the first time, and which might concern figures like Oriana Fallaci, Gina Lollobrigida, and Natalia Aspesi. We will better focus this discussion in the third edition of the Guide to Astrology, which we are tenaciously working on. Fundamentally, we can anticipate it here by saying that the 12 topologies one reads about refer to the fundamental archetypes of each sign. Each sign constellates one or more keywords or refers to one or more basic symbols that can be experienced for what they represent or for the opposite of that representation. For example, one of the keywords for Leo is generosity, but this means that in everyday reality you can find Leos who are exceptionally generous, and conversely representatives of this sign who are absolutely selfish. Practice will teach you to distinguish them, and above all, the careful examination of all the values contained in a natal chart will lead you to the exact deciphering of the archetypes contained in a horoscope. More than signs, you will need to talk about axes and their relative opposing dialectics. One cannot, in fact, talk about Cancer without bringing up the Capricornian rigidity that very often provides the characterological framework for those born under the fourth sign of the zodiac. In other words, There is a compensation by which a Virgo tends to behave more according to the valencies of a Pisces than for herself, and this applies to a greater or lesser extent to all signs. Therefore, thoroughly study the characteristics of each sign and its opposite, and learn to discover the similarities in behavior between them. You will become convinced that there are extremely ambitious and useful Cancers and Capricorns, extremely neat and extremely messy Virgos and Pisces, extremely superficial and extremely profound Geminis and Sagittariuses, and so on. Thus, when it is said that the heart is a key organ for Leo, this must be understood in both the positive and negative senses, and so this may mean, for example, for the man in chart number 38 of my Guide to Astrology, that he had an extremely strong heart that saved his life numerous times, and then a heart attack struck him down. Be careful, then, to learn to read the contrapositive dualism in every sense, and to recognize the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde parts hidden in every 30 degrees. These two halves sometimes live separately at different ages of life, and other times simultaneously, and then we may have, for a Virgo, for example, great mental order, a continuous tendency to catalogue, schematize, and set deadlines, and a corresponding physical disorder, poor management of space in their room or on their desk. This is also the case for our Bellisario, who played on the snowy streets of Keva, a small town 50 kilometers from Cuneo, scraping her knees in the snow to save falling bread, suffering and rejoicing like many Cancerians in this world. And then, once she became an adult, but does Cancer ever truly become an adult? Projected into the gears of a career and professional success in key positions in the 70s, the years of the challenge for women's success in Western society. Here she emerges as a very compensated Cancer, brandishing the strongest competitiveness, Moon Mars on the ascendant, to reach the highest career peaks. Today, her critics say that she would step over the shoulders of her loved ones just to achieve more prestigious positions in her climb to success. Not everyone knows, however, that her ascent was largely earned in the field, as our subject is a true scientist who dealt with the very first computers in the late 50s. She is the author of compiler languages herself, and solved quite a few problems, both hardware and software, especially in the design of the first personal computers and small systems destined for small and medium-sized businesses. She worked as a programmer, and her semi-epic History of Italian Computer Science records many whole nights spent with punch tapes and very slow processors searching for the bug that jammed the entire firmware. I read the first part of the book, Woman and Top Manager, without first drafting her natal chart or even knowing her birth data. This was to allow myself to be conditioned as little as possible and thus have the most open idea possible of the character. Well, I understood two things from the very first pages, that she was a Cancer and that she had strong Libra values. This latter reference is evident from a whole series of nuances in the book, and from the importance that aesthetic and clothing details gradually acquire in the economy of the book, also in relation to her social professional ascent. Marisa is a woman of great aesthetic taste, who made an impression on international management, thanks also to her made-in-Italy style. But her son in the 9th house, which caused her to travel and stay abroad a great deal, makes her be considered a very Italian woman, but a citizen of the world. There is and will be much to ponder regarding the Cancer-computer relationship. There is no doubt that there is a very close link between the two. Look at the pioneers. Bellisario is one. In the field of astrology in the United States, the first computer astrologers were Cancers, or had strong Cancer values. Here in Italy, if you allow me the immodesty, I started, excluding isolated attempts not followed by continuous major work. Today, many Cancers deal with computers, and this can be explained by what I said before, by the values of compensation that make the tender and visceral Cancer desire to cling to something numerical, stable, and defined. But Cancer is also memory, and how else can you define a computer? Marisa Bellisario loves animals very much. Birds, cats, dogs, even a little goat. This, from what I have understood over years of research and study, is very much in line with the lack of children. This too is a kind of compensation. The love for children that are not there shifts to animals that serve as substitutes. Saturn in the 5th house may be the indicator of this. Before concluding, however, I would like to say something more about Bellisario's luck. Our subject was undoubtedly helped by the stars, by Jupiter in the 1st house, which is a sign of good fortune, and by Venus in the 10th, which promoted her through her feminine status rather than hindering it. This holds even more true when considering a fundamental fact of her horoscope, her Mars in Libra, which is detrimental for an executive who must make important decisions in a short time frame. Reading her book, one understands that our subject very often found herself at crossroads, with an almost inability to make decisions, and so the stars were her friends, and that touch of aggressiveness that comes from the Mars-Moon conjunction helped mask her insecurities. Published in 1992,